You're listening to Brilliant Breakthroughs, episode number 20, with David Wallace.
Hi, small business owners. Welcome to the podcast, Brilliant Breakthroughs, where we focus on brilliant breakthroughs for the small business owner. That's you. This is also the name of the #1 Amazon best-selling book for the small business owner and entrepreneur. You can find out more on Amazon, and in the written form, we have the book as well as the ebook itself. All you have to do is go to Amazon, type in Brilliant Breakthroughs for the small business owner, and if you need a subtitle, that would be Fresh Perspectives on Profitability, People, Productivity, and Finding Peace in Your Business. Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Mongan, and I'm the anthology leader of this great book. And today we are honored to have Dave Wallace, who's a #1 Amazon bestselling author, with us to talk about your business's profitability being supported via improving your sales. Dave's chapter is the third one in the book, and it's titled Sales Suck in Solitude. I have to say that slowly. Sales Suck in Solitude. Cool name for a book title and or chapter title. And I want to say thanks, Dave, for joining us. You rock being a #1 author.
Thanks, Maggie. It's great to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. You know, Dave, you covered a lot of ground in your chapter, while at the same time really only scratching the surface of a lot of the challenges that small business owners have when they are dealing with sales. They have to deal with all of these things that seem to come up and just bite them in the face, and it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. We make sales much more complicated than it needs to be, I think.
Right. So during our time together, what I'd like for you to do is share with us one or two things that if you could wave your magic wand and help all the small business owners out there in the world, what is it that they need to be applying to their business regarding sales?
I think if you were to just try to net it down to two things, you'd have to say that small business owners really need to understand who their ideal customer is, what do they look like, and just be able to recognize their ideal customer so that they can target their sales efforts toward those organizations that are really going to do business with them. And second, most people don't understand why their customers are their customers. Sounds silly, but it's true. And I think if you can do those two things, you can make your life a lot simpler.
Well, I agree with you, Dave, because I work with a lot of small business owners, and most of them tell me that they know who their ideal customer is, but when I start asking them questions, they really don't. This is a pretty common issue, isn't it?
I think so. I didn't think it was until I started doing a lot of research and I started kind of deconstructing some of my successes and where I fell short. And I realized that, yeah, there were certain people I was talking to I was never going to do business with because they just didn't fit the profile. So I think that it's something that we think we fully understand, but I think the reality is we really need to become more systematized in how we look at what makes up our ideal customer.
Okay, so when we're talking about what makes up our ideal customer, where do you think we're still getting snagged?
I think what happens is most of the time when you ask somebody, what's your ideal customer look like or who's your ideal customer, they'll say things like, well, our ideal customer is someone that values our services, or they struggle in a particular area and they recognize that we can help them. And the reality is I don't think that that's descriptive enough. I think that's much too high level. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally, totally. I'm
Yeah.
with you.
So what I think people need to do, and I think they need to get very specific. And the good news is you can do this pretty quickly. It's not a long, arduous exercise. But I believe that there are, and I'm not the only one, there's a lot of people out there that believe that there are 7 attributes that you need to look for when you're talking about what does your ideal customer look like. I'll give you all 7, but we're probably only going to have time to dive in to 2 or 3 of them. And the first one would be something like, what do they look like as an organization? Second one would be, how do they operate? The third one would be, do we actually have access to the decision maker? And then there's other ones, do they actually have money? That might be kind of nice to know.
Yeah.
Also, we need to understand, how do they measure value? What, when you ask them the question, what does success look like, that they can articulate that, and then that you could match that. In this day and age, we have to understand what their attitude toward technology is. And finally, I think it's really important to understand what's their attitude towards service and toward a long-term relationship. Those, I think, are the 7 categories, and you can get very corporate in the way you define them, but I kind of like to keep it more conversational. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And when I'm hearing you talk about these, there's a combination of like the really big scope and then some of the smaller details. And you have that really nice balance in this. The one thing that I see happen is people get caught up on, oh, I need to come up with my avatar for my customer. And this is a different approach.
Right.
And to me, it makes a lot of sense. And all 7 of these seem important, but 7 is a lot for our listeners to remember, especially if they're driving to work right now. So how about if we drill it down to just 3 key components here that they can focus on?
All right, let's take I'd like to take a look at the first 3 that we mentioned, and we'll dig into those. And then if we have time to talk about others, we will. If we don't, then we can move on. Does that work for you?
Sounds like a perfect plan. Let's do it.
All right, so when you think about what they're like as an organization, that's really pretty simple. You're thinking about things like, how big are they? How much revenue do they generate? Are they multiple locations, or do they have a single location? Even if you're a small business, you might be doing business with both private and publicly held companies, and it would be nice to know whether or not you have more success with one or the other. And probably one of the more important things is, organizationally, what's their philosophy about change? Because, I mean, if you think about it, because some organizations, the status quo is really, they're fine with it. And if you're selling something that disrupts the status quo, you're not going to do business with those organizations that are very comfortable just kind of being where they are. And you need to know that.
I completely agree with you on that. I am amazed at how many companies or businesses say they want change, but then when it comes time to make the change, they resist and they'll hesitate. They'll do everything except change.
Yeah, a friend of mine sent me the results of a survey, and the number one thing that employees said that they wanted to do is they wanted to change the company to change. And the number 2 thing they said was they hated change.
Yeah, I think we've seen the same research.
Right. So let's say you go through this exercise, and it turns out that you can pretty clearly identify what they are organizationally, and organization is a big word. It could be this could be a one-person organization that you're talking to, but what does your perfect customer look like? And you know that by examining where you've done business. The second thing you need to do is you need to understand how they operate, and by that I mean, are they decisive, or do they take a long time in making a decision? And it's important to know that, because if your particular product or service is something that people have to move quick because it's very time sensitive, and you're talking to somebody that you can tell pretty quickly is not decisive, that might give you a clue that they're probably not going to fit for you guys. And then the second one I would say, and there's a lot more to this, but just at a high level, are they risk takers or are they risk averse? And this kind of goes a little bit to the idea about change, but there's some organizations that do very well dealing with companies that are not risk-taking companies, or they're not risk-taking individuals. So it's, none of these are a good or a bad thing. They are what I would call an is. They're either that way or they're not. And you need to understand what the profile of your ideal customer is in terms of how they operate, so you can focus your energy on those companies that operate in a way that maps to the success that you have.
Well, sure, because this is about matchmaking, right?
Right. And the challenge that you have is that you'll see a big company or a popular name, and you automatically assume I have to do business with them because they're either XYZ or something. And so you pursue them to the ends of the earth. And the reality is they're never going to do business with you. And you'd be better off spending your time with somebody who was much more inclined to do business with you.
Sure. So it's really like dating.
That would be a good way to look at it. Yes.
Okay. So now there's three things. What's the
Right.
third one?
And I would say the third one is, and the reason I say this, I'll get into this in a second. You need to have access to the decision maker, and that sounds silly, but the reality is there are a multitude of different people who influence a sale in any sized organization, as long as there's more than one person. And you need to understand for the particular project that you're going after, who is the decision maker and can we actually meet with them? And in a lot of cases, you're talking to the CEO. So you're like, okay, I'm pretty much at the decision maker, but I'll tell you a quick story. I was dealing with a client of mine. I was talking with the CEO and I put forward a plan and he said, okay, I want to review this with my office manager. The office manager wasn't on board. The CEO wasn't about to overrule the office manager, so we didn't move forward. So you still, even where you're talking to the CEO, you still need to understand who are the players. And then what you want to understand about the decision maker is things like, do they delegate? Because a lot of decision makers will delegate their decision to their lieutenants, and that's okay. But you want to know, am I going to be able to re-engage with the decision maker after we've gone through whatever process we have to go through to get ready to present our solution? Because if they delegate and then they never engage again, you're going to spend a whole lot of time and energy talking to somebody who's never going to pull the trigger. And again, it's not about this is a good or a bad thing. It's about understanding with the companies that are the most likely to do business with you, meaning the profile of the companies that have already done business with you, what do they look like in this area? So you know how to map, again, dating, you know how to map to an organization that fits that profile.
Oh, sure. And when I was an executive recruiter for about 10 years, we were always told go as high up in the food chain as you can because we want to get to the decision maker. But I learned, just as you did, that that is not always the head of the organization because they do, certain CEOs or presidents really trust their people who are subject matter experts to be the final decision maker.
Right.
So we have to know who we're talking to.
Exactly. And you can be dealing with a particular customer and the project that you're talking about isn't going to have the same decision maker any time. So of the 7 attributes that I talked about, there are some of those that are related to the business, but there are others that are related to the project, and the decision maker is one of them. I could have 2 projects with one company and they can have 2 very different decision makers, even though it's the same company. So just because I know the president or the CEO doesn't mean that for both of those different projects, that person is actually going to make the decision. I remember years ago, I was talking to an executive and I said something about working with one of their people, and what was brought to my attention, which surprised me, they said, when you say that, when you say you can only talk to the highest level person in the organization, what you're basically saying is, hey, Mr. or Mrs. President, you've done a really lousy job in putting your team together because they can't make decisions. I can only talk to you. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, nobody wants to make all the decisions. That's why you hire a good team.
It is. But I bet you have some stories that you want to share with us to go into why these 3 points are really important.
That's a great leading question. The reality is that if you don't if you don't have a match with what how the organization looks, what they're like, and how do they operate, it really doesn't make any sense to even go any farther until you can understand whether or not that particular company you want to pursue is actually a match for you. And what people tend to do is somebody says, hey, can you give me a proposal? And so right away they start, oh, great. I'm almost 60% or 70% of the sale because they've asked me for a proposal. So you grab one of your subject matter experts, or you grab some people, you say, we got to put a proposal together for Maggie Enterprises. And you spend all this time because Maggie Enterprises asked you for a proposal, but the reality was that they don't operate the way your ideal customer operates. And so you spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy on a proposal that goes nowhere. And this is why when you talk to most companies, you'll find out that 70 to 80% of the opportunities that they think they're going to sell, they're actually never going to make the sale. And you're like, wow,
Yeah.
that's a really lousy number. And the reason is not that they're going to do business with somebody else. The reason is they're not going to do business with anybody. They're just going to keep on doing whatever it was they're doing. So you've lost the sale to that evil entity known as no decision.
That's a really valid point, is no matter what you do, there are times that you will not close the deal, period.
Right.
It has nothing to do with you or what you're offering or even your price point, because everybody always thinks it's related to price, and it is not. It's the organization itself.
Right. And then we would say, let's say that those first two things match. If you don't have access to the decision maker, why would you keep on pursuing the opportunity? Because you have no idea what their criteria for making a decision is. I learned years ago, I forget who, I think it was somebody associated with Stephen Covey's organization, came up with a quote, something about never make a proposal to someone whose criteria for decision making is unknown to you. Kind of a highfalutin language, but the idea is if I want to make a sale, if I want to make a presentation to you, and one of your key criteria for decision making is how large is my organization, and you really want to deal with a small organization because you want to be a big fish in my pond, and you ask me and somebody asked me, well, I go into a meeting and you say, well, how big's your organization? I'm like, oh wow, I better really make my organization look big. So I go through this, well, we have this and we have that, blah, blah. And you stop me, you go, thanks, Dave. That's really good information. We were really looking to work with a small company because we want to be a big fish in the pond, but I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much. And the meeting's over, because you had no idea what the decision-making criteria for that decision maker was, but you just went full speed ahead without understanding that. So you have to understand, do you have access to the decision maker, and do you understand their decision-making criteria? And when you know that, then you can start moving forward.
Well, sure. And part of that is what they value.
Right.
And if you don't know what they value, you can't help them make an effective decision.
Right. Now, I want to give a quick disclaimer to the listeners, which is this sounds onerous, and it's not. This can happen pretty quickly. If it's a fairly simple sale, it can happen in one meeting, or it can happen with some research. If it's a complicated sale that has a lot of moving parts, it's going to take some time. But where people get in trouble is they get a couple of indications that they're moving in the right direction, and they forget everything that they've set up as their process, and they move right to, okay, when can I get the order? And in my chapter in the book, I talk about what happens when you kind of don't follow your process on a bike ride, and how that relates to this. And you get cocky and you forget to follow all the steps. And I don't know, if I was going to travel on an airplane, I wouldn't want the pilot to have the first three check things on the checklist be green, and then he just says, okay, we're going to take off. I kind of want him to go through the whole checklist.
That's a great analogy. I like that, because we forget. I was watching a movie last week about couples, a divorcee that got back into the game, and he was misreading signals because he thought when somebody smiled or gave him a little green light, that it was full blown green light. You can take me, baby. And he was a mess because of this. And I think we do that in sales often.
Right. You have the role in the meeting, who's the, I forget what they're called, the amiable, and and they're nodding their head. at every point you make. But what you don't realize is they're nodding their head all day anyway. So you just assume that they're totally on board with what you're saying. You skip over about 3 or 4 points. And I remember early in my career, one of the people I was talking to said, you always have to make sure that you slow down for yellow lights. And you're asking questions, and if you get a yellow light, the idea is not to hit the accelerator and blow through it. The idea is to figure out, I got to turn this light green. So part of that is the story that you're talking about with, you get a little indication, you say, well, that's kind of a yellow light, but I bet if I just speed up, I can just make it through. So I would say that, and there's a whole bunch of other pieces to this ideal customer thing, but these 3 points will, if you can just figure out those 3 things, you go a long way toward focusing your energy on organizations that are actually going to do business with you.
Okay, so that makes sense. And you said 70 to 85% of opportunities won't ever close.
Correct.
Because we're misreading and we're actually misbehaving. We're not following our own protocols.
Right, and we're talking to the wrong people, and lots of different things are happening, and then so we have this idea that we just have to flood the funnel with as many opportunities as we can. And I would say, wouldn't it be great if instead of having 1,000 or 100 or whatever the number is, out of which you get 10 sales, if you had 11 people that you were talking to and you got 10 sales?
Right.
A lot less stressful, a lot more predictable. You would know exactly what your monthly revenue is. And basically those other, 85 people that are in the pipeline of let's say there's 15, the other 85 are never going to do business with you anyway. So why are you spending time with them? And the amount of time it takes to figure out that they're not going to do business with you is actually pretty quick.
Okay, so you were telling us about one set of stats, but I bet there's another set that really we should be paying attention to, which is if we do our work to get really specific about our ideal customer, what are the numbers then?
The numbers are actually really promising. Is most organizations, as soon as they do this, as soon as they start going through the exercise, they will typically double the amount of people that they're talking to that they sell within months. And over a period of time, again, we have to look at this. This is taking the long view. This is not a light switch, everything changes in 15 minutes. But organizations that follow this, whether it's a single person organization or a group of people, you can get up to an 80 to 90% of the people that you're talking to are going to do business with you. And what a wonderful place to live that would be.
Oh, yeah. To know that you're closing 8 or 9 out of 10 folks.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're a long process, a short process, a high ticket, a low ticket, 8 or 9 out of 10. Wow, that would be awesome. And I know most small business owners aren't there.
No, because we've grown up in this environment that's activity based, and it says that your success is based on your activity. So talk to 100 people to get, make 100 phone calls to get 10 conversations to get 3 of the, to get 1 meeting. And it's the old dialing for dollars, which just nobody does that anymore. The people that are really successful, they do their research up front. They figure out who they should talk to. They have wonderful messages that they deliver that talk about value. And then they close a high percentage of the people that they talk to, and they live in a very predictable, almost boring world where their bank account just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that's the kind of boredom I want.
That is a great way to be bored, I think. Yeah. Okay, so I assume that there's a lot more to this than what you're sharing. So listeners, if you want to learn more, stay tuned because I bet Dave's going to be sharing how we can get a hold of him. But I want to go back to something before we go there because we're not finished yet. Okay, this is really great stuff that I think all small business owners really need to be paying attention to. You mentioned a second point, which you wanted small business owners to understand why their customers are their customers. And I think this is the real juice of the conversation. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can, and it's a scary proposition when you think about the fact that you talk to people, myself perhaps included in the past, and you say, well, why is this company your company? And they go, well, because of this and this and this, and it's really not descriptive. And I want to give you an example that's very recent, because I was talking to a friend who's a small business banker, and he was sharing how difficult it is for him to get new customers, because apparently it's a fairly competitive market. And I said, well, do you know why your customers are your customers? And I said, beyond the fact that you're pretty cool and you're pretty funny and all that stuff. And he said, well, I really don't know, but I'm going to go talk to my marketing people, because I'm sure we have that. Well, their marketing people were thrilled with the question, because they said, you know what, we survey our customers all the time, and this is what they told us. Our customers pick us because, number one, they have access to decision makers. Number two, fast turnaround on the decisions. Number three, there's the staff expertise of this particular bank. And number four, the availability of the staff, or the accessibility. So this guy's like, okay, he sends me this information. He's feeling pretty good. He's driving to work the next day. He's in his car and he hears a commercial from one of his main competitors. And they basically said the exact four things, almost verbatim. And he's like, okay, maybe that's not the reason our customers are our customers. So now they're revisiting their claim, and they're trying to understand why their customers are their customers, because what I just mentioned, those are high level sort of testimonial things, but they're not really reasons why a company is going to do business with you. To me, that's table stakes. If you're a small bank, if you're a small business banker, those four things are table stakes. Everybody should do those things.
They should be an industry standard, right?
Right,
I'm with
right.
you. So then how does somebody shift from finding out why your customers are your customers and not somebody else's?
Well, it turns out it's shockingly simple.
Good.
You,
Bring it on.
you actually interview them,
Oh,
and you don't survey them, because if think about a survey, and if you think about it, you can manufacture the outcome of a survey by the way you ask the questions, or by the options you give the respondent to the survey to select. So you actually have to talk to these people. But it's not, hi Maggie, this is Dave. Why do you guys do business with us? It's, you have to be, you, you have to be, you have to be much more professional than that. So what you have to understand is, you not only have to understand your customer, probably at a greater level of understanding than you think, but you also have to understand their industry, so that you can really hone in on intelligent and penetrating questions that are really going to get to the root of why an organization does business with you. And if you don't come prepared, I mean, if I'm talking to you and you're a business owner that's very successful, if I don't come prepared to that interview, you're going to give me about 5 minutes, and then you're going to say, Dave, thanks for the call, but I got, I got something else to do. You might be polite and say, oh my God, the fire alarm just went off or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't come to these interviews prepared, you're not going to get the information that you need. And in some cases, the reality is you can't do the interview yourself. You have to have a third party do it, because a third party doesn't come to the conversation with all the preconceived notions about why somebody does business with you than you come to that conversation with. So they can be dispassionate and just much more disengaged from the emotion of that. And ultimately, what you have to do is you have to get down to the language of business, and that's money. And you're looking for
yes.
the value that your customer gets from doing business with you. And if you think about it, access to a decision maker is not a value statement. That's just kind of a nice thing. But what if you had access to the decision maker, and every time you did business with this company, you lost money? That's probably doesn't work.
Probably
So
not so good.
yeah, so think about this as an alternate to access to decision makers. What if I was talking to you, whether about my company or I was representing another company, and I asked you, after some setup questions and you said, well, XYZ solution helped us increase our monthly revenue by more than 5 times within 30 days of the implementation. That has a value connotation to it. Or by changing the way we display our warning label, you have some manufacturing something where you have to put a warning label on it. We eliminated a supplier from the supply chain. We reduced complexity and we lowered our costs by $150,000 annually. Now, whether your business would ever lower cost for somebody by $150,000 or $15,000 is not important. What's important is that they're demonstrating and they're describing a quantifiable value that they're getting from doing business with your organization. And if they didn't have that, they wouldn't do business with you.
So really what we're talking about is the key is finding out the value you're providing to them so you know how to share that in your presentation for the sale.
Spot on. And the critical piece of this whole thing is it has to be in the words of your customer. It can't be, well, we're pretty good at this and I'll bet we save our customers 15% on this particular function. You've got to get it from the customer because you're going to find surprising information about the value that you deliver. And it could be really good surprising. More often than not it is. But if it's not good surprising, it's an opportunity to improve. So either way, it's very valuable. But you're right. What this allows you to do is it allows you to build stories so that when you go talk to somebody else, you're not talking about, hey, if you call us, we answer the phone. Okay, that's really nice. But if you say, customers who look a lot like you when they do business with us, they typically see that their receivables go down, they reduce their receivables by 15 days, or they increase their output of this particular capability by 18% in the first 6 months. And as a business owner, you can quickly, probably in your mind, do the math and figure out what that means to your organization.
Yeah, well, right. You have to speak their language. If we don't, we have a disconnect and we lose.
Right.
And they lose too because we didn't take the time to do our work so it would land right for them to say, oh, you do know our world. You are the person we've been looking for.
Right. And when that happens, you change the conversation because now you don't sound like everybody else. You sound different. You sound like you understand their business. And there's a immutable law out there that I'm sure you're well aware of. It's called the law of reciprocity. And the reality is we know by human nature, if you share something of value with someone else that's valuable, and especially if it's unique, that will come back to you in positive ways many times over. And don't get me wrong, what I'm talking about is not easy. This is not easy. It requires work. But when you get this information, man, it's worth its weight in gold. You've got some really good stuff. And now you sound different than everybody else who's doing the same things that you're doing. And all of a sudden you've put yourself in a different, now all of a sudden you're the iPhone and everybody is comparing themselves to you. Think about the iPhone 10. The iPhone 10 is out. Apple does not mention the iPhone 10 in any of their advertising. It's all image, brand, cool stuff. And all of their competition talks about how their camera is better than the iPhone 10, where you don't have to wait in line. And so Apple is the standard and everybody else is trying to measure up to them. So when you start doing this, you become the standard that everybody else is trying to measure up to. And that's the best place to be of all.
I couldn't agree with you more. So our time is almost up, and I regret to say that. So Dave, if there were one thing that you would want the listeners to remember here and apply to their business immediately, what would it be?
I would say, if I was on my knees, I would say, please, please, please make the investment to find out why your customers are your customers. That, I think, if you can do that, there's just so much goodness that comes out of that. So that would be my plea, and that would be my thing that I would say. Apply that tomorrow. Start that process.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
There's gold there. I agree with you. Thanks, Dave, for sharing the importance of understanding why we can't just do sales in solitude and we end up sucking. The numbers that you said were very accurate of 70 to 85% failure versus 85 to 90% success, right?
Yep,
Am I close?
That's close. That's a pretty nice flip if you can do that.
Yeah, it is. It's better than pancakes. Okay.
Not much, but
But this is important for the small business owner to really understand. So listeners, if you want to learn more about how to engage with this #1 best-selling author, Dave Wallace, go ahead and start by reading chapter 3 in the book, Brilliant Breakthroughs for the Small Business Owner. You can go find it on Amazon or by going to the app Brilliant Biz Book and click on Ask an Expert. You'll see Dave's name appear. That would be Dave Wallace. We have 2 Daves there. And type in your question and he'll reply back to you. I want to say thank you, Dave. You rocked this. You helped us understand that there is a difference in our success rate when we take the time to understand why our customers buy from us and what they value. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. It was great being on, and Happy New Year.
Likewise. And everyone, thank you for listening to Brilliant Breakthroughs podcast, where you learn more about how to create more brilliant breakthroughs for your small business.